Imagine you are 24 years old. You are strapped into the cockpit of the fastest fighter in the world, a Messerschmitt Bf 109, the airplane that conquered Poland, the airplane that broke France, the airplane every young man in Germany dreams of flying. And you are watching a wooden airplane pull away from you. You firewall the throttle. Your Daimler-Benz engine screams past its manufacturer's redline and laugh at you. They will think you are lying to cover up your own incompetence. They will file the report under unverified pilot claims and forget about it. That report still exists. It sits today in the German Federal Military Archives, the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv in the town of Freiburg. It is dated the 16th of September 1941. 3 German fighter pilots, 1 British aircraft, 8 minutes of maximum power pursuit, a final line that reads, "Enemy aircraft accelerated beyond tracking capability, fuel critical, return to base." The report is signed, the signature is illegible. Whoever those 3 pilots were, and no historian has ever confirmed their names, they were the first men in the world to chase a de Havilland Mosquito. They were also the first to discover the truth that would define the rest of the air war over Europe. The fastest fighter in the world could not catch a British bomber built from plywood, birch, and balsa wood. Over the next 4 years, the Luftwaffe would fly over 4,000 interception missions against the Mosquito. Some of the greatest fighter pilots of the war, men with 200 kills, 300 kills, would take turns trying to bring it down. 98% of them would fail. 3 unnamed pilots, 1 wooden aircraft, and the moment German air power stopped being invincible. To understand what happened over the Bay of Biscay on that September afternoon in 1941, you have to go back 3 years, and you have to understand something strange, something almost unbelievable. The 3 unnamed German pilots who chased a de Havilland Mosquito that day should never have had anything to chase, because the aircraft they were pursuing was never supposed to exist. It begins in 1938, in a quiet drawing office in Hatfield, Hertfordshire, England. A 56-year-old engineer named Geoffrey de Havilland, and he does not like what he sees. De Havilland is not a soldier. He is a designer, slim, formal, always in a jacket and tie, even at the drafting table. He speaks quietly. He does not raise his voice. But behind those eyes is a man who has been building aircraft since before the First World War, since before most of the pilots who will one day fly his machines were even born. And Geoffrey de Havilland sees something the British Air Ministry does not. He sees that the next war will be won by speed. Every bomber the Royal Air Force is building carries gun turrets. Heavy metal turrets, bristling with machine guns, manned by extra crewmen, wrapped in armor plating. The theory is simple. Bombers will be attacked. Bombers must defend themselves. Bombers must be fortresses. De Havilland thinks this is wrong. Every gun turret adds weight. Every crewman adds weight. Every plate of armor adds weight. And every pound of weight makes the aircraft slower. Slower means easier to catch. Easier to catch means shot down. The heavier the bomber, the more it needs to defend itself. And the more it defends itself, the heavier it becomes. De Havilland proposes something the Air Ministry has never seriously considered. A bomber with no guns, no turrets, no gunners, no armor, just 2 engines, 2 crewmen, a pilot and a navigator, and pure, unrelenting speed, so fast that no fighter alive can catch it. And here is the second thing that makes the men in Whitehall look at him like he has lost his mind. De Havilland wants to build it out of wood. Wood. In an age of aluminum, steel, and modern stressed skin construction, Geoffrey de Havilland is proposing to build a warplane out of the same material as a piece of dining room furniture. Laminated birch plywood, Ecuadorian balsa, Canadian birch, glued together with resin adhesives and shaped in molds that would not look out of place in a boatyard. The Air Ministry laughs. They laugh privately, in memos. They laugh in meetings. They laugh in the corridors of the buildings in Whitehall, where decisions are made about how Britain will fight the war that is now clearly coming. The reports come back to de Havilland's desk in Hatfield, with polite letters attached. The concept is interesting. The concept is imaginative. The concept is, unfortunately, impractical. Britain will fight the coming war with proper aircraft, metal aircraft, gunned aircraft, armored aircraft, not with pianos that fly. The first rejection comes in October 1938. The second rejection comes in October 1939, 1 month after Britain declares war on Germany. The ministry has other priorities. Fighter Command needs Spitfires. Bomber Command needs 4-engined heavies. There is no aluminum to spare, no factories to spare, and no patience for a designer proposing to build combat aircraft out of glued-together wood. Geoffrey de Havilland does not stop. He and his team keep drawing. By early 1940, France has fallen. The Luftwaffe is massing on the Channel coast. Britain stands alone. And in the middle of the Battle of Britain, with Spitfires burning in the sky over Kent, with London beginning to burn, Geoffrey de Havilland writes to the Air Ministry a third time. The wooden bomber. Twin Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. No armament. Estimated top speed exceeding 400 miles per hour. The third rejection arrives in October 1940. The project is officially cancelled, killed on paper, struck from the register of aircraft the Royal Air Force will accept. Geoffrey de Havilland has now been told no by his own government 3 times. In the middle of a war, his country is losing. And this is where the story turns. Because there is another man in Britain, working in another part of the war, who has been watching Geoffrey de Havilland's rejections with growing alarm. His name is Sidney Cotton. Cotton is 46 years old. He is Australian, not English. He is not part of the Air Ministry. He is not part of the regular Royal Air Force. He does not wear a proper uniform. He does not follow proper procedure. And most of the officers in Whitehall consider him a nuisance at best and a lunatic at worst. Sidney Cotton runs Britain's photographic reconnaissance program. His job is to fly over enemy territory and take pictures. Pictures of factories, pictures of harbors, pictures of railway junctions and troop concentrations and airfields. In a war that will be fought by information as much as by bullets, Sidney Cotton is the man who brings that information home. And Sidney Cotton has been paying attention. He has read Geoffrey de Havilland's rejected proposals. He has looked at the numbers. And Sidney Cotton, the Australian outsider, the man everybody in the Air Ministry hates, understands something the ministry does not. A photographic reconnaissance aircraft does not need guns. It does not need turrets. It does not need armor. It does not need to fight. It needs to go fast, take pictures, and come home. Exactly what Geoffrey de Havilland has been proposing to build. And so, quietly, without publicity, and without the Air Ministry's full approval, Sidney Cotton orders 10 of them. 10 aircraft. 10 unarmored, twin-engined machines that the ministry has already killed on paper 3 times, placed on the books of Sidney Cotton's photographic reconnaissance program at Royal Air Force Benson in Oxfordshire. Without that quiet, unauthorized order from an Australian nobody in Whitehall wanted to listen to, the de Havilland Mosquito would never have flown. And it would have died on paper in October 1940. It would have been a footnote in aviation history, the wooden bomber that never was. And on the 16th of September 1941, 3 German pilots over the Bay of Biscay would have had nothing to chase. Meanwhile, in Berlin, something happening that Geoffrey de Havilland does not know about. That Sidney Cotton does not know about. That will define the next 4 years of the air war over Europe. In the offices of the Reichsluftfahrt Ministerium, the German Air Ministry, an intelligence report is being read. It is the early months of 1941. The report has come in through neutral Sweden. It describes a new British aircraft still in development. Twin-engined, wooden construction, no defensive armament, estimated top speed exceeding 400 miles per hour. The German intelligence officers read this report. They look at each other, and they do exactly what the British Air Ministry did. They laugh. Because to a German aeronautical engineer in 1941, this report reads like propaganda, like disinformation, like a joke. Germany has spent the last decade building modern military aircraft. Heinkel He 111 bombers, Dornier Do-17s, Junkers Ju-88s. These are proper machines, all metal, all modern, all armed. The idea that Britain, the great industrial empire, the country that invented modern aviation, would regress to wooden construction for a combat aircraft is not just implausible. It is insulting. An engineer at the Reichsluftfahrt Ministerium writes an evaluation. The report is filed in March 1941. The evaluation reads, in essence, that the British claim of a wooden bomber capable of 400 miles per hour must be either deliberate misinformation or evidence of British industrial collapse. The war is only 2 years old, and Britain is already so desperate for aluminum that they are building bombers out of tree bark and glue. The Germans have a nickname for this aircraft before any of them has ever seen one. They call it Englische Möbel, English furniture. The name spreads through Luftwaffe fighter units in the summer of 1941. It appears in officers' mess conversations. It appears in the margins of intelligence briefings. Something anyone with proper training could shoot down in seconds. If the desperate British ever actually finished building it. And through the summer of 1941, this belief hardens into doctrine. German fighter pilots, flying the Messerschmitt Bf 19F, the finest single-engine fighter in the world, top speed, 420 miles per hour at optimum altitude, veterans of Poland, France, the Balkans, Crete, and the opening months of Operation Barbarossa in Russia. These pilots have been told, over and over again, that they fly the fastest thing in the sky. Nothing built by human hands can escape them at altitude. Certainly not a piece of English furniture. Meanwhile, 600 miles away in Hatfield, Hertfordshire, on a cold grey morning in November 1940, a wooden aircraft is towed carefully from a hangar at Salisbury Hall onto the grass runway. Its serial number is W4050. It is unpainted. Its wooden skin is still bare and pale. It looks, standing there in the November mist, less like a warplane and more like a large, elegant model. Geoffrey de Havilland's son, Jeffrey de Havilland Jr., the company's chief test pilot, climbs into the cockpit. He is 30 years old. He does not know he will be dead in 6 years, killed in a later prototype in 1946. He starts the engines. 2 Rolls-Royce Merlins. The sound is unlike anything the mechanics standing on the field have ever heard from a wooden aircraft. Deep, powerful, precise. He advances the throttles. The Mosquito accelerates down the grass. It lifts off. It flies. The test data is compiled over the next several months. The numbers come back. The unpainted prototype, W45, is not just fast. It is faster than the Spitfire, the fastest aircraft in Royal Air Force service. The aircraft that saved Britain in the Battle of Britain has just been beaten by a bomber, a wooden bomber. Built in a hangar the ministry did not want funded. In an aircraft the ministry cancelled 3 times, purchased in the end only because one Australian outsider quietly bent the rules. By September 1941, Sidney Cotton's Photographic Reconnaissance Unit at Royal Air Force Benson has taken delivery of its first operational Mosquitoes. They are polished for extra speed. They are painted in a distinctive pale blue. Photo reconnaissance. Blue, designed to make them invisible at high altitude. Their cameras are loaded. Their pilots are briefed. On the 20th of September 1941, Squadron Leader Rupert Clerk of No. 1 Photographic Reconnaissance Unit climbs into the cockpit of a Mosquito PR Mark I at Royal Air Force Benson. Beside him, in the observer's seat, is his navigator, Sergeant Sauerbutz. Their mission is to photograph the German-occupied French coast, Brest, La Pallice, Bordeaux, where U-boat pens are being built to strangle Britain's Atlantic supply lines. They take off, they cross the Channel, and over the coast of occupied France, 3 Messerschmitt Bf 19s, scrambled by German ground controllers who see a suspicious contact on radar, climb hard to intercept them. The Germans have never seen this aircraft before. They have only heard the jokes. English furniture. Something to shoot down in seconds. They are about to become the second interception, 4 days to end with the same report. Filed, dismissed, and buried in the archives of the Reichsluftfahrt Ministerium. Because 4 days earlier, in a place the German air defense system was not even watching, 3 other German pilots had already chased a Mosquito over the Bay of Biscay. And they had failed, and Berlin had laughed, and Berlin was about to keep laughing for a very long time, until one morning in January 1943, they would stop laughing, and Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, in front of a live radio microphone, in front of the entire German nation, would look at his notes and lose his place and stumble over his words, because 3 Mosquitoes were flying over his head, and there was not a single thing his Air Force could do about it. The laughter did not stop all at once. It faded slowly, 1 intercept report at a time, over the winter of 1941 and into the spring of 1942. And every report that reached Berlin said the same thing. We saw them. We chased them. We could not catch them. By March 1942, the Reichsluftfahrt Ministerium had a folder on its desk. The folder was labeled in careful German bureaucratic script, Untersuchung Mosquito, Mosquito investigation. When the folder was opened for the first time, it contained 12 pilot reports, 12 failed intercepts, 0 kills. By June 1942, the folder had grown thicker. 28 reports, still 0 kills. By September 1942, it had become a file drawer, then a shelf. Then something the clerks of the German Air Ministry had to move to a bigger cabinet in a larger office because the paperwork simply would not stop coming in. And in every one of those reports, the same phrase appeared, over and over, in the handwriting of dozens of different German pilots. Enemy aircraft pulled away. Enemy aircraft pulled away. Enemy aircraft pulled away. The Mosquitoes were no longer just photographing the French coast. By the summer of 1942, they were flying to Kiel, to Bremen, to Hamburg, to targets deep inside Germany that no British aircraft had ever reached in daylight and returned from alive. They flew alone, unarmed, in pale blue paint that made them nearly invisible at 30,000 feet. They photographed the great naval yards where the battleship Tirpitz was fitting out. They photographed the factories at Pilsen where Skoda was building tanks. They photographed the fjords of Narvik where German warships hid from British eyes. And they photographed Berlin. Berlin, the Reich capital. The city Hermann Göring had personally promised Adolf Hitler would never be bombed. The city whose air defenses were the most concentrated in Europe. Hundreds of anti-aircraft guns, dozens of fighter squadrons, radar rings layered 3 deep across the northern approaches. And unarmed British aircraft were flying over it in broad daylight, taking pictures and going home. The Focke-Wulf 190AA, Germany's newest fighter, was supposed to be the answer. It was faster than the Bf 109 at low altitude. It was heavier armed. It was pilot-friendly, robust, and by 1942, it was pouring out of German factories in numbers that should have made it decisive. But the FW-190 had a problem, and every Luftwaffe fighter commander knew it. Its engine, the BMW 80-101, was a 14-cylinder radial. It was powerful. But radial engines lose power in thin air. Above 20,000 feet, the FW-190's performance began to fall away. By 25,000 feet, it was struggling, and the Mosquito flew at 30,000. At 30,000 feet, the FW-190 was already gasping. The Bf 109G2, with its inline Daimler-Benz DB605A engine, could reach that altitude, but only just, and only slowly, and once it got there, it could barely maintain the speed needed to match a Mosquito, let alone catch one. There was one option: dive. Climb above the incoming Mosquito, wait, then dive on it, trading altitude for speed, converting potential into a brief, terrifying burst of overtake velocity. For maybe 60 seconds, a diving German fighter could match or exceed a Mosquito's speed. 60 seconds. And then the dive would flatten out, and the Mosquito, cruising at 410 miles per hour with no dive to slow it down, would simply keep going. Then came the 25th of September, 1942. That morning, 4 Mosquitoes of No. 15 Squadron Royal Air Force took off from an airfield in eastern England. They flew low across the North Sea, so low their propellers threw spray from the wave tops. They flew for hundreds of miles under the German radar. And then they climbed, briefly, and streaked across the Norwegian coast at rooftop height. Their target was Victoria Terrasse. In Oslo, the Gestapo's Norwegian headquarters, the men flying the Mosquitoes were led by squadron leader George Parry. He was 29 years old. His navigator, flying officer Robbie Robson, sat beside him. The other 3 crews were young men in their 20s, most of them not yet married, some of them not yet fully trained on the Mosquito. They flew straight down the streets of Oslo, below the rooftops of a European capital, in broad daylight. They dropped their bombs at nearly 0 feet. And as they turned for home, screaming out over Oslo Fjord, 4 Focke-Wulf 190s of No. 3 Staffel, Jagdgeschwader 5, stationed nearby to protect a quisling political rally that day, climbed hard to intercept them. 4 FW-190s, 4 Mosquitoes, the most experienced Luftwaffe unit in Norway, against a British squadron that had been operational for less than 4 months. The Germans caught one. Flight Sergeant Gordon Carter's Mosquito had a mechanical fault. His bomb bay doors would not fully close after the drop. The drag slowed him. The FW-190s closed on him and shot him down over the water. Carter and his navigator, Sergeant William Young, were both killed. The other 3 Mosquitoes accelerated. The FW-190s could not close the gap. Squadron leader George Parry and the 2 surviving crews landed back in England that evening. They had flown 1,100 miles. They had bombed the Gestapo headquarters in the heart of occupied Norway. They had fought elite Luftwaffe fighters, and they had come home. In Berlin, when the reports of the Oslo raid reached the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, an officer picked up a red pencil and wrote a single word in the margin of the incident report. Unmöglich. Impossible. But it was possible. And it was happening. And it was about to get worse. The 30th of January, 1943. 10 years to the day since Adolf Hitler had come to power in Germany. The Reich was celebrating. Ceremonies were being held across the country. Banners hung from every government building. Every radio station in Germany was broadcasting the same schedule of speeches. A national commemoration to remind the German people of a decade of Nazi rule. The 2 most important speeches were both being broadcast live from Berlin. At 11 o'clock in the morning, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, second only to Hitler himself, the man who had personally guaranteed that Allied bombers would never reach the Reich, was scheduled to address the German nation from the Air Ministry building. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Reich Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels was scheduled to speak from the Sportpalast. In England, on a wet grass airfield in Norfolk, Royal Air Force Maham, 3 Mosquitoes of No. 105 Squadron were taxiing to take off. They had timed their departure precisely. Squadron leader Reggie Reynolds led the flight. His crews had studied the Berlin broadcast schedule the way surgeons study a chart. They knew exactly when Hermann Göring would step up to the microphone. They knew exactly how long they had to be over the city. They flew across the North Sea. They crossed the Dutch coast at low altitude. They climbed to 25,000 feet as they approached Berlin from the northwest. At 11 o'clock in the morning, Berlin time, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring stepped up to the microphone at the Air Ministry building. He had just turned 50 years old. He was wearing his cream-colored Reichsmarschall's uniform, weighed down with medals. He cleared his throat. He began to speak. At 3 minutes past 11, radar controllers at the Berlin Air Defense Center detected 3 fast-moving contacts approaching from the northwest. Fighter controllers scrambled multiple Bf-19 squadrons. At 6 minutes past 11, in the middle of Hermann Göring's opening remarks about the invincibility of the German Luftwaffe, 3 Mosquitoes appeared in the sky above central Berlin. They came in at 25,000 feet, in broad daylight, in perfect formation, their pale blue paint glinting in the January sun. They opened their bomb bays. They dropped their bombs onto central Berlin. They banked west advanced their throttles, and left. At the microphone at the Air Ministry building, Hermann Göring heard the crump of bombs. He heard the anti-aircraft guns opening up all across the city. He heard the air raid sirens beginning to wail. He lost his place in his speech. He tried to keep speaking. His voice, transmitting live to every radio in Germany, betrayed him. He stumbled over words. He paused. He tried to recover. He could not. The broadcast was pulled off the air. For the next hour and 5 minutes, German radio played martial music while technicians tried to sort out what had happened. Millions of Germans, in factories, in kitchens, in offices, listening to their radios on this national anniversary, heard the great Reichsmarschall Göring, the man who had promised them air supremacy, silenced in mid-sentence by British bombs. The Messerschmitts scrambled to intercept, never got within firing range. The 3 Mosquitoes went home to England unhurt. That afternoon, at 4 o'clock, Reich Minister Joseph Goebbels stepped up to another microphone at the Sportpalast in Berlin to deliver his speech. 3 more Mosquitoes appeared over the city. These were from number 139 Squadron. Different unit, different pilots. Same tactic. Goebbels' speech was interrupted at almost the exact moment Göring's had been. Bombs, sirens, chaos. The German nation, on the 10th anniversary of Hitler's rise to power, listened to their 2 most important propaganda voices, the 2 most powerful communicators in the Reich after Hitler himself, being humiliated on live radio in the same day, 8 hours apart, by wooden aircraft their air force could not stop. There is a phrase for what happened that day. The Germans do not have a word for it. But everyone who was there, everyone who listened to those broadcasts, everyone who watched those Mosquitoes streak across the Berlin sky untouched, everyone understood something had broken, something had ended. Hermann Göring understood it too. Some months later, at a meeting with senior officers of the German aviation industry, the Reichsmarschall returned to the subject. A stenographer was present. The stenographer wrote down his words. "It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. I turn green and yellow with envy. The British, who can afford aluminum better than we can, knock together a beautiful wooden aircraft that every piano factory over there is building. There is nothing the British do not have. They have the geniuses, and we have the nincompoops." The words leaked. They spread through Luftwaffe headquarters over the following weeks. Officers passed them around in private in low voices. And through the Luftwaffe Fighter Command, a single unmistakable message came down from the very top. Stop the Mosquito, at any cost, by any means, whatever it takes. 6 months later, on the 21st of July 1943, at a small airfield called Wiesbaden-Erbenheim in western Germany, a new fighter unit was formed. Its official designation was Jagdgruppe Süd der Obd L, Fighter Group south of the Supreme Commander of the Luftwaffe. Its purpose was written into its founding orders in plain German. To combat the RF Mosquito, nothing else, not to escort bombers, not to defend cities, not to intercept the American heavy bombers that were beginning to appear over Germany. This unit had one job, and one job only: catch the Mosquito. On the 15th of August, 1943, Jagdgruppe Süd was upgraded to full Geschwader status and renamed Jagdgeschwader 50, and Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring personally chose the man to lead it. His name was Hermann Graf. Graf was 30 years old. He had been born in a small village in the Black Forest, the son of a blacksmith. He had worked in a locksmith shop as a teenager. He had joined the Luftwaffe in the late 1930s, and by the summer of 1942, flying on the Eastern Front with Jagdgeschwader 52, he had become one of the most decorated fighter pilots in the history of German aviation. He was the first pilot in the history of aerial combat to reach 200 confirmed kills. 200. He was so famous that the Nazi propaganda ministry had put him on posters. He was so famous that they had made him play goalkeeper for a Luftwaffe soccer team called Die Roten Jäger, the Red Hunters, that toured Germany playing exhibition matches. Hermann Graf was, in the summer of 1943, one of the most recognizable faces of the German war effort, and Göring gave him one order: you may choose any pilot you want, from any unit in the Luftwaffe. Anyone, bring them here, give them the best equipment we have, and catch the Mosquito. It was an unprecedented offer. Graf pulled his old comrades from Jagdgeschwader 52 on the Russian front. Oberleutnant Alfred Schreiber, 23 years old, an ace with over 100 kills. Oberfeldwebel Ernst Süß, Feldwebel Heinrich Füllgrabe. He brought them all to Wiesbaden-Erbenheim. The Luftwaffe gave them everything. Bf 109 G5s and G6s, polished by hand until their surfaces gleamed. Hand polishing added 5 miles per hour by reducing skin friction. The aircraft were fitted with GM1, a nitrous oxide boost system that injected liquefied, laughing gas directly into the supercharger intake, giving temporary bursts of extra horsepower at high altitude. They were planning to equip the unit with Messerschmitt Me 163s, rocket-powered interceptors. The pilots had already begun training on gliders in preparation. By the end of July 1943, Jagdgeschwader 50 was declared operational. 19 aircraft, 7 aces. Best equipment in the Luftwaffe, direct authorization from Göring. A blank check drawn on the resources of the Third Reich, and their job was to kill a wooden airplane. For 4 months, they tried. Hermann Graf pulled every trick he had learned in 3 years on the Russian front. He set up standing patrols at 30,000 feet. He tried to position his fighters ahead of predicted mosquito routes, so they would already be at altitude when the enemy arrived. He drilled his pilots on diving attacks, on deflection shooting at maximum range, on tactical intercept geometry that no fighter pilot had ever needed to think about before. None of it worked. The mosquitoes were too fast. The dives ran out of momentum before his pilots could close to gun range. The standing patrols burned so much fuel that his aircraft had to break off just as mosquitoes appeared. The GM1 boost gave short bursts of extra power, but drained itself in minutes, and the moment it was gone, the mosquitoes pulled away again. Alfred Schreiber, 23 years old, veteran of 100 combats over Russia, later described chasing mosquitoes as the most frustrating flying of his entire career. You could see them. You could sometimes get within a mile, and then they were gone. By November 1943, after 4 months of continuous operations, Jagdgeschwader 50 had shot down exactly 1 mosquito. 1. Hermann Graf had personally caught it over Groningen in the Netherlands, after loitering at 30,000 feet for so long that he had almost run out of fuel. The mosquito had appeared where he was waiting. He had dived on it. He had, for once, closed to firing range. He had opened fire. The mosquito had gone down, and even that kill was disputed. Some German records credit it to Graf. Some credit it to another cause: mechanical failure aboard the Mosquito, or damage from flak. Historians still argue about it. What is certain is that in 4 months of trying, with the best pilots and the best equipment the Third Reich could assemble, Jagdgeschwader 50 confirmed exactly one victory against the aircraft it had been built to destroy. And its sister unit, Jagdgeschwader 25, commanded by Oberstleutnant Herbert Ihlefeld, an ace with 132 victories to his own name, did no better. JG-25 claimed 2 Mosquitoes. They lost 9 aircraft in combat. They lost 5 more to other causes. Both units, the 2 most specialized fighter formations Germany ever fielded, created explicitly for one purpose, were burning themselves alive, chasing an opponent they could not reach. In late October 1943, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring authorized the disbanding of Jagdgeschwader 50. It was absorbed into Jagdgeschwader 301. Its pilots were reassigned. Hermann Graf, the first pilot in history to reach 200 kills, was quietly transferred to command Jagdgeschwader 11. Gryslowski went to Jagdgeschwader 1. Jagdgeschwader 25 was disbanded in November. The 2 great anti-Mosquitoes, units of the Luftwaffe, created 6 months earlier with unlimited resources and unlimited authority, had ceased to exist. Between them, they had killed 3 Mosquitoes, and they had accomplished nothing. In the offices of the Reichsluftfahrtministerium in Berlin, the file drawer marked Untersuchung Mosquito was now 3 cabinets wide. It contained thousands of intercept reports. It contained assessments from every Luftwaffe fighter wing in Western Europe, and in the winter of 1943, a report landed on the desk of the Reichsmarschall himself, signed by Diplom-Ingenieur Kurt Tank, the chief designer of Focke-Wulf, the man who had built the FW-190. Tank was 45 years old. He was, along with Willy Messerschmitt, one of the 2 great German aircraft designers of the war. He did not exaggerate. He did not editorialize. His reports were, in the tradition of German engineering, dry, precise, and devastating. The report said, in essence, our fighters have been optimized for combat against enemy bomber formations. We have prioritized firepower, armor, and maneuverability. The Mosquito proves that an aircraft optimized purely for speed creates a capability we cannot counter with our existing designs. A fighter capable of intercepting the Mosquito would require a fundamentally new aircraft, one built specifically for high-altitude, high-speed interception. The development time for such an aircraft would be measured in years. We do not have those years. The report was read. It was filed. It was passed up the chain of command. And in Berlin, in the winter of 1943, as the file drawer full of failed intercept reports continued to grow, as Mosquitoes continued to fly over Germany, unarmed, unstopped, unchallenged, the men who ran the Luftwaffe began quietly to understand something they could not yet say aloud. They were going to have to build a new kind of aircraft, not a better propeller fighter, something else. Something no one in the world had ever built before. And they were going to have to build it faster than any nation had ever built a new aircraft in the history of aviation, because they were running out of time. The new aircraft was already flying. It had been flying in prototype form since the summer of 1942, when a small team of Messerschmitt engineers in Bavaria had rolled a strange machine out of a hangar at Leipheim airfield and pointed it down the runway. It had no propellers. Where the propellers should have been, on either side of the fuselage, There were two long metal tubes. Inside each tube, a set of turbine blades spun at nearly 9,000 revolutions per minute, compressing air, mixing it with kerosene, igniting it, and firing the exhaust out the back faster than the speed of sound. The aircraft was called the Messerschmitt Me 262. The Me 262 flew for the first time on gasoline turbine power on the 18th of July, 1942. The first flights were cautious. The engines were experimental, prone to flame out, dangerous to operate, but the potential was clear. By the time production models were flying in combat 2 years later, the Me 262 was reaching speeds no propeller-driven aircraft could match. 540 miles per hour, faster than the Mosquito, faster than anything. If the Luftwaffe had put the Me 262 into full production in the summer of 1942, when the technology first worked, the war in the air over Europe might have ended very differently. But that is not what happened. Adolf Hitler saw the Me 262 fly in November 1943. He was shown a demonstration flight at Insterburg Airfield in East Prussia. And what Hitler saw when he watched that revolutionary aircraft streak across the sky was not the fighter that could finally catch the Mosquito. What Hitler saw was a fast bomber. He ordered the Me 262 to be developed as a bomber. He wanted it to strike the Allied invasion beaches when, not if, the Allies came ashore in France. The engineers argued, the generals argued. Adolf Galland, by now the general of the fighter arm, argued in writing and in person. The Me 262 was a fighter. It was the fighter Germany needed. It was the answer to the Mosquito, to the American heavy bombers, to everything that was going wrong for the Luftwaffe in the skies over Europe. Hitler did not listen. The Me 262 program was diverted. Time was lost. Months went by. The airframes that could have been rolling off the production lines as interceptors in the spring of 1944 were instead being modified, badly and against the advice of nearly every engineer involved, into fast bombers. Kurt Tank, meanwhile, was building the other answer. At Focke-Wulf, working from a quiet drafting office in Bremen, Tank was designing what he hoped would be a conventional fighter capable of catching mosquitoes. He took the FW-190D9, the long-nosed variant, and stretched it. He gave it a pressurized cockpit for high-altitude flight. He lengthened the wings. He fitted the Junkers Jumo 213E engine, boosted with MW50, methanol water injection, capable of producing over 2,000 horsepower for short bursts. The aircraft was designated the T-152H, the T for tank, in recognition of his design leadership. On paper, the T-152H could reach 472 miles per hour at 41,000 feet. On paper, it could catch a Mosquito. The first prototypes flew in the summer of 1944. Production began in November 1944. The first operational examples reached Luftwaffe units in January 1945. By then, it was too late, because 5 months earlier, on the 26th of July, 1944, over the Bavarian Alps south of Munich, something had already happened that would rewrite the history of aerial warfare. It was a clear summer day, high cumulus, visibility unlimited. At Lechfeld Air Base, southwest of Munich, a young pilot named Lieutenant Alfred Schreiber climbed into the cockpit of a Messerschmitt Me 262A1A. Its work number, its production serial number, was 130-017. Its Luftwaffe unit code identified it as belonging to Erprobungskommando 262, the operational test unit for the world's first jet fighter. Alfred Schreiber was 20 years old. He had been born on the 11th of November 1923 in a small town in what was then Czechoslovakia. He had joined the Luftwaffe in 1941 at the end of Sidney. He had trained as a Zerstörer pilot, a heavy fighter pilot, flying twin-engined Messerschmitt Bf 110s. In the summer of 1944, he had been transferred to Erprobungskommando 262. He was, in the language of the German Air Force, an Erprobungsflieger, a test pilot. His job was to fly the new jet in operational conditions and to fight in it if the enemy appeared. That afternoon, over Munich, the enemy appeared. At high altitude, cruising steadily at 30,000 feet, a single de Havilland Mosquito, PR Mark 16 of number 540, Squadron Royal Air Force, was photographing German industrial targets in southern Germany. Its pilot was Flight Lieutenant A.E. Wall. His navigator was Pilot Officer A.S. Lobben. They had flown from an airfield in northern Italy. They had no reason to believe this day would be different from any of the hundreds of Mosquito reconnaissance flights that had come before it. They saw contrails climbing toward them. They saw an aircraft moving faster than any aircraft they had ever seen. Alfred Schreiber, in Me-262, work number 13007, climbed at nearly 4,000 feet per minute. His two Junkers Jumo 004B turbojets ran at maximum thrust. His airspeed indicator showed 500 miles per hour, then 520, then 540. The Mosquito began to turn. Flight Lieutenant Wall did what every Mosquito pilot had done for 3 years when a German fighter appeared. He advanced his throttles, banked into a defensive turn, and prepared to accelerate away. The German fighter did not fall behind. For the first time since September 1941, for the first time in the entire operational history of the Mosquito, the German fighter kept coming. Alfred Schreiber closed to firing range. He opened fire with his 430mm cannon. What happened next has been argued about ever since. In the violent evasive maneuver that followed, the Mosquito's front cabin door tore loose in the airstream. It flew back and struck the wing. It struck the tail. Some accounts credit the loss directly to Schreiber's cannon fire. Other accounts suggest the airframe failed under the extreme stress of the evasion, with or without hits from the German jet. What is certain is that the Mosquito began to disintegrate. Flight Lieutenant Wall and Pilot Officer Lobben both survived. They bailed out. They came down in Allied-held territory in northern Italy after a long parachute descent. Their Mosquito did not. On the 26th of July, 1944, a wooden aircraft made by de Havilland fell in pieces over the Bavarian Alps, and Lieutenant Alfred Schreiber, 20 years old, became the first pilot in the entire history of human flight to score an aerial victory in a jet fighter, the first jet kill in history, against an aircraft made of plywood, birch, and balsa wood. The moment 3 unnamed German pilots had failed to achieve over the Bay of Biscay in September 1941. The moment 100, 1,000, 10,000 German intercept sorties had failed to achieve had finally happened. The Mosquito had been caught. Alfred Schreiber landed at Lechfeld. He filed his report. It was passed up the chain of command. The victory was verified. The paperwork moved through the Luftwaffe bureaucracy. Slowly, as paperwork always did in the last year of the Third Reich. Alfred Schreiber was told he had scored a kill. He was not told he had made history. 4 months later, on the 26th of November 1944, at the same airfield at Lechfeld, Lieutenant Alfred Schreiber climbed into another Me-262. It was a routine training flight. The Messerschmitt Me-262 was a difficult aircraft to fly. Its Jumo 004 engines were temperamental. They required constant, delicate throttle management. Advance the throttles too quickly, and the compressor would stall. Advance them too slowly, and the aircraft would sink into the ground on landing approach. On his final landing approach that November afternoon, something went wrong with Alfred Schreiber's aircraft. The exact cause has never been fully established. The engines may have flamed out. There may have been a hydraulic failure. He may have misjudged his approach in the deteriorating winter weather. His Me-262 stalled short of the runway. It struck the ground hard. Alfred Schreiber was killed instantly. He was 21 years old. He had turned 21 exactly 15 days earlier. He did not know, at the moment of his death, that he had made aviation history. The formal verification of his July 26th victory as the first jet fighter kill in the history of the world had not yet worked its way through the bureaucratic system. The confirmation would be filed after his death. Alfred Schreiber died before anyone told him what he had done. On the same day that Alfred Schreiber's Me-262 crashed short of the runway at Lechfeld, mosquitoes of No. 105 Squadron were flying over the Ruhr. Others of No. 139 Squadron were photographing targets near Hamburg. Others were on training flights over England, preparing new crews for operations that would continue into the final months of the war. None of them was intercepted. None of them was lost. By the spring of 1945, the Ta-152H was finally in service. Kurt Tank's fighter, the aircraft that was supposed to catch the Mosquito, the answer to 3.5 years of Luftwaffe humiliation, had reached operational units. Just 44 Ta-152H airframes were completed before Germany surrendered. 44 against a Royal Air Force fleet of over 7,000 Mosquitoes. The Ta-152H encountered Mosquitoes twice in combat. In neither engagement did it score a kill. By the time Germany had finally built the fighter that could theoretically catch a Mosquito, Germany was out of pilots trained to fly it, out of aviation fuel to keep it in the air, and out of time to matter. Adolf Galland had written an assessment for Reichsmarschall Göring in May 1944. Before Alfred Schreiber's first jet kill, before the Ta-152H, before the last desperate year of the war in the air, Galland's assessment was, like Kurt Tank's report from 6 months earlier, dry, precise, and final. The Mosquito represents British design philosophy at its most effective. They identified a mission and built an aircraft optimized exclusively for that mission. Our aircraft attempt to serve multiple roles. We have no aircraft that can perform the Mosquito's mission. More critically, we have no aircraft that can stop the Mosquito. This represents a fundamental failure in our design approach that cannot be corrected with existing resources or timelines. The assessment was signed. It was submitted. It was, in the language of a professional military officer writing to his commander, an admission of complete strategic defeat in one specific arena of the air war. Reichsmarschall Göring read it. Reichsmarschall Göring filed it. Reichsmarschall Göring did nothing. By then, there was nothing left to do. The final numbers, when they were compiled after the war, told a story that historians have argued about ever since. The de Havilland Company and its licensees in Canada and Australia built 7,780 Mosquitoes during the Second World War. Combat losses came to approximately 1,200 aircraft. Of those 1,200 lost Mosquitoes, fewer than 100 are believed to have been shot down by German fighters. The vast majority, the great majority, were lost to anti-aircraft fire, to bad weather, to mechanical failures, to navigation errors, to the ordinary attritional accidents of a long air war. The Luftwaffe flew thousands of interception sorties against Mosquitoes over 4 years of combat. Their success rate measured against the specific aircraft, their 2 dedicated anti-Mosquito units, JG-25 and JG-50, had been built to destroy, was below 1.5%. 98.5% of the time, the Germans tried and failed. The men who chased Mosquitoes and lived long enough to remember it went on to lives that scattered across the second half of the 20th century. Hermann Graf, the ace who had commanded Jagdgeschwader 50, was captured by American forces in Bohemia at the end of the war. He was handed over to the Soviet Union. He spent 4.5 years in Soviet captivity in prison camps whose conditions broke many of his fellow prisoners. He came home to West Germany a diminished man. He worked as a household appliance salesman in the 1950s. He died in Engen, in the Black Forest, where he had been born, in 1988, at the age of 76. Alfred Grislowski, whom Graf had personally chosen to fly with him in the fight against the Mosquito, survived the war and lived quietly in retirement. He died in 2003 at the age of 84. Herbert Ihlefeld, who had commanded Jagdgeschwader 25, survived and lived until 1995. Adolf Galland, the general of the fighter arm, went on to command Jagdverband 44, the elite jet fighter unit of the final weeks of the war. He was captured by American forces in May 1945. He wrote his memoirs. He advised the government of Argentina on aviation matters. He died in Oberwinter, Germany, in 1996, at the age of 83. Kurt Tank, the designer of the Ta-152H, left Germany after the war. He went first to Argentina, where he designed jet aircraft for the government of Juan Perón. From Argentina, he went to India, where he designed jet aircraft for the government of Jawaharlal Nehru. He came home to Germany in the 1970s. He died in Munich in 1983. Alfred Schreiber, who had made aviation history at 20 and died at 21, did not come home at all. He was buried at Lechfeld. He never knew what he had done. The question historians still ask, when they look at the Mosquito story, is a simple one. How did it happen? How did the most feared air force in Europe, the Luftwaffe that had crushed Poland, France, and Yugoslavia, that had come within a hair of defeating Britain in 1940, that had fielded the greatest concentration of fighter aces the world has ever seen, failed so completely for so long against a single British aircraft made of wood? The answer is not that German pilots were inferior. They were not. They flew as hard as men can fly. They died in tremendous numbers doing it. The answer is not that German fighters were inferior. They were not. The Bf-19 and the FW-190 were among the finest piston engine fighters of the war. The answer is not even that German engineering failed. It did not. Kurt Tank designed the Ta-152H, Willy Messerschmitt designed the Me-262. The world's first operational jet fighter was a German aircraft. The answer is about choices made in offices, at desks, by men who never flew an aircraft in their lives. The British Air Ministry chose to reject the Mosquito 3 times. Only Sidney Cotton's quiet, unauthorized 10-aircraft order kept it alive. Hitler chose to divert the Me-262 to the bomber role in 1943, losing months of development time that could not be recovered. Göring chose to promise the German people invincibility that his air force could not deliver, and then to punish his commanders for failing to deliver it. The Luftwaffe Ministerium chose, in 1941, to dismiss the intelligence report about a wooden bomber as either misinformation or evidence of British collapse. And every one of those choices, made in comfortable rooms, far from any cockpit, had a cost that was paid by the young men in the aircraft. Air Force Mosquito flight was made in 1963. The Mosquito, Geoffrey de Havilland's wooden bomber, the aircraft the Air Ministry cancelled 3 times, the aircraft the Luftwaffe could not catch, outlived the Third Reich by 18 years. It outlived Hermann Göring by 17. It outlived Alfred Schreiber by 19. It outlived the war it had been built to fight by a lifetime. And every time it flew, in every one of those years, in Malaya, in the Middle East, in target tug service over the North Sea, in the final quiet peacetime skies over England, it flew because one Australian outsider named Sidney Cotton, in the darkest year of the war, had quietly ordered 10 of them behind his own government's back. The aircraft German pilots could not catch was, in the end, the aircraft that almost never existed. And the men who chased it, the named and the unnamed, the aces and the 20-year-olds, the propeller pilots and the boy in the jet, chased it not because they were beaten men. They chased it because their leaders had made choices that no fighter pilot alive could correct. They chased it because, sometimes, in war, the aircraft your engineers build is only as good as the men who decide, in rooms far from any battlefield, what your engineers are allowed to build. And in the 4 years between the Bay of Biscay in September 1941 and the ruins of Berlin in May 1945, no German fighter pilot ever fully caught the Mosquito. Not the aces, not the jet pilots, not the specialized units, not even Alfred Schreiber. In the world's first operational jet fighter, on the summer morning he made history and did not live long enough to know it, the English furniture bomber, the wooden joke, the aircraft that flew home every single time.